ask both of you. Let me go back to the issue of free speech. Ed Schultz, comments about Laura Ingraham, followed by a suspension, followed by an apology, was... my attitude is I believe in free speech. Did they handle this correctly?
I think they handled it correctly, and really kind of his conduct was inexcusable. I think his apology was somewhat sincere, but nevertheless, where do you go off like saying something like that about her? It's totally inappropriate.
What if I called any Democratic woman a slut?
Oh, forget about it. Look, Laura Ingraham is an attractive, conservative, white, female, blonde. They hate conservatives. Sean, it is the last acceptable form of misogyny in this country. Hatred, prejudice towards conservative females.
Bachmann
Look what happened to Don Imus.
Bachmann and Palin continued.
Yeah, Sean, you would be fired too. I mean, look, I'm all for free speech. It's what I do. It lets me sit here, but it means responsible speech.
You should also be appropriate.
It's not my vernacular.
Can't be rude.
You know, go through the alphabet. You know, and you can certain letters, certain words you never say about a woman, to a woman.
Well, it's an issue of character. Okay, so when you're looking at someone like Ed Schultz, you look at someone like there's a very big difference. So this guy, I'm sure this is not the last of we hear from him in terms of his gaffes.
They embarrass themselves when they do this. The best traits I think that conservative women have, among all the others, but particularly a Sarah Palin, a Laura Ingraham.
Smarter.
No, they expose that's true, but they expose, Sean, the worst side of liberals. They make them go crazy, and they expose what ugly, unfair, and just hypocritical.
When you demonize women
this morning,
like this.
Can I point out this morning on MSNBC, the special, How to Empower Women, or some special about knowing your value? How ironic that Mika Brzezinski hosts a special this morning about knowing your value. Huh.
All right, guys, good to see you both. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Sean.
And speaking of Ed Schultz, so we'll have more on his outrageous comments and how they get absolutely no play in the mainstream media's coverage. We'll expose this hypocrisy tonight in Media Mash. And then later, the 3-inch lizard. You see that little lizard right there? It could literally cost thousands of people their jobs because environmentalists, if they have their way, that little lizard will be on the endangered species list. And that means no more drilling in West Texas. Ainsley Earhart will report tonight. She went to West Texas. Straight ahead. Welcome back to Hannity. Time for our Media Mash, our weekly roundup of all the ways the Obama mania media tries to put their liberal spin on all the news. And here to go through this week's material, the president of the Media Research Center, Brent Bozell. Brother Bozell, how are you?
Sean Hannity, how you doing?
You're a great American. All right, let's examine the situation, because I think this is important, about Ed Schultz. Let's first start with the comments he made about Laura Ingraham, and then we'll go to the apology.
And what are the Republicans thinking about? They're not thinking about their next-door neighbor. They're just thinking about how much this is going to cost. President Obama is going to be visiting Joplin, Missouri on Sunday. But you know what they're talking about? Like this right-wing slut, what's her name, Laura Ingraham? Yeah, she's a talk slut. You see, she was, back in the day, praising President Reagan when he was drinking a beer overseas, but now that Obama's doing it, they're working him over.
First, I want to take some time to offer an apology. On my radio show yesterday, I used vile and inappropriate language when talking about talk show host Laura Ingraham. I am deeply sorry, and I apologize. It was wrong, uncalled for, and I recognize the severity of what I said. I apologize to you, Laura, and ask for your forgiveness. This is the lowest of low for me.
All right, I'm going to be honest. That seemed sincere to me. You know, I've defended free speech consistently on this program. I'm very concerned, as I was saying in the early part of the program today, about people. You can't apologize. There's no room to revise and extend your remarks. There's groups looking to attack conservatives on radio, Fox, go after their advertisers, hurt them to intimidate and silence opposition. And I think, you know, I think this is appropriate. Laura's accepted it. Move on. I want to get your take.
Yeah, I'll take it maybe a step further. If I were on talk radio or on television as a regular host, I think I'd last 20 minutes before I stuck my foot in my mouth. People do make mistakes, and people can ask for forgiveness. What he said was reprehensible. It could not have been more vile. It was personal. It was deliberate. It was insulting. It was hate-filled. That apology, Sean, was a man's apology. He manned up unequivocally, comprehensively, and I give him all the credit in the world. He taught everyone in this town how to make an apology. He really did. So
it wasn't one of these "if I offended you" nonsense. Those are always half-hearted apologies. You know, I know there will be people that'll say, "Well, did he do it to save his job?" It seemed real to me. I took it as sincere. Laura, to her credit, accepted his apology. I think case should be over. But let's go back. And maybe it's not a fair comparison. Maybe it is. You tell me. But let's go back to the Don Imus case, because he was fired. And here's how some of the media covered that.
We're going to begin with the firestorm surrounding radio host Don Imus. He'll begin a 2-week suspension on Monday.
Over the past several days, we have witnessed an explosive reaction to some hateful words uttered by Don Imus.
It started out as an offhand, albeit outrageous and hurtful comment on a radio program heard by a small fraction of the country.
All right. Is it a fair comparison, number one? And Imus, to be honest, he's known for just having fun and making jokes and making fun of everybody. He admits this was wrong. He apologized as well. Is that a fair example?
There's a big difference. No, there's a big difference in the two of them. As reprehensible as as reprehensible as Don Imus's comments were, he was trying to be funny. He thought he was being funny. He was, in fact, being insulting, and he apologized for it. Ed Schultz was trying to be insulting. He was trying to be harmful. That's point number one. Point number two is that Don Imus's show was nowhere near as big as Ed Schultz's show is right now. So if all the media are going to cover the Don Imus thing, why isn't anyone covering Ed Schultz? And nobody is. But thirdly, and here's the important thing.
Nobody in the mainstream media is covering this?
This isn't being covered. This isn't a story. The interesting thing is, here's the words explosive, firestorm, national discussion. Folks, who's creating the explosion? Who's creating the firestorm? Who's creating the national discussion? It was the national media themselves. No. They're the ones who elevated Don Imus. Fine. If you're going to elevate Don Imus, then where are you elevating Schultz? Point. You know, right now, as we're talking right now, there are people doing petitions in Washington, D.C. to close down conservative websites. Where are we right now with this onslaught of personal attacks on conservatives?
Well, let me ask you this.
Where's that firestorm now?
Last question, because I think this is important. There is this cottage industry that I'm talking about, that there are people right now monitoring every word I say. I'm on the air 4 hours a day. They monitor every conservative talk radio host, the Fox News channel all day, in the hopes one word, one sentence, one phrase they can take out of context and then immediately throw it at the advertisers, try and silence and intimidate and harass. Doesn't this have to come to an end here? And that's why I'm saying leave Ed Schultz alone. It was an appropriate apology. Case closed. It should be over.
They have every right to monitor you and Fox and me and anyone else, but they have no right to take things out of context.
But they want to silence us. There's a goal here.
Yeah, when Ed Schultz makes a mistake, look how conservatives reacted. We're all championing him and applauding him for his apology. It's high time the left learn how to do that, too.
All right, I think this is a very interesting lesson and maybe a teachable moment for liberals. Do they have an open mind? Brent Bozell?
Good luck.
All right, good to see you. Let not your heart be troubled. Great. Oh, wait till you see the investigative report we have coming up on this lizard that may stop the drilling industry in West Texas with Ainsley Earhart, who went on the ground there. That's coming up. And don't forget, Rush is on with Greta right after this program. Great American Panel next. And tonight on our Great American Panel, he was a former pollster for President Jimmy Carter and an advisor to George McGovern's failed presidential campaign. Sorry. Fox News contributor, good friend Pat Goodell.
I'm sorry.
She is the chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Susan Paricchio is with us, and he's the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, and the former chairman of the RNC, Jim Nicholson, is here. Guys, good to see everybody. Thank you for being here.
Good.
All right, let's start. Barney Frank admits he got an ex-lover a job at Fannie Mae. Remember all those hearings? Fannie Mae's fine, not fine. Okay. He said, well, if it's a conflict of interest, and much of Washington is involved in conflicts, it's a common thing in Washington for members of Congress to have spouses work for the federal government. There's no rule against it. Now, all these people that are working for Fannie made all this money. In Franklin Rain's case of, what, $90 million? Is that ethical?
Not ethical. I mean, they cooked the books, inflated because their bonuses were dependent on that alleged income that they were making. I mean, Frank drug a bunch of people up there, not Raines, and put them on the rack at the same time that his lover is embedded over at Fannie Mae and, currying favor on the part of the agency with someone who has oversight. I mean, it's what makes Americans so cynical.
I talked to Barney Frank today about this, and when I was down in Washington, and he said that he doesn't feel like he did anything wrong, that this goes on all the time on the Hill, and he ticked off incidents where people help their spouses get jobs. But I also talked to other Democrats who think that what he did is questionable, and they point out that the House rules prohibit what he did, that you can't recommend anyone for a job unless that person was working for you.
Right. So, well, okay. So that raises the question: should there be an investigation?
Of course, but we're not going to have any. Of course, there should be. Fannie Mae is the greatest.
Right, Republicans control the House. Why not?
Well, we'll see, because they're still covering up for Republicans involved in Fannie Mae too. That's the reason they haven't done anything yet. This was the greatest bipartisan scandal of all time. And the greatest looting of America by a government agency.
$90 million in one case.
Well, you go back to Jim Johnson. You got a chief of staff in the White House who was a lobbyist. You got Tom Donilon, who was cooking
Jamie Gerlich.
Jamie Gerlich. All these people should be, frankly, some of them should be behind bars, and none of them have been prosecuted. The fact of the matter is, what Barney Frank says it goes on all the time, it is. It goes on with journalists whose spouses work in the government and they cover the government they're working for. It goes on. This town, so Washington is Sodom and Gomorrah. This is only taking the lid off of it. Barney Frank was one of the worst examples.
National Science Foundation, renowned for its gold standard approach to peer review, et cetera, et cetera. Let's take a look at some of how money is spent, okay? National Science Foundation, $80,000 to study March Madness. Study on baby name trends, $1 million. Study of laundry folding robot, $2 million for a study on social network pictures. $3 million study on lobster health. I hope the lobsters are healthy. You know, maybe we should give them medical Obamacare.
Well, I think it's endemic of what has gone on in Washington. Nobody would say no to anything. Mm-hmm. And somebody throw some crazy idea up there, and somebody would get an earmark, and it would get it funded. But I will say, because of the Republicans, that has stopped, and it darn sure needs to be stopped.
If you this is just a snapshot of the waste and abuse that exists in the government. If you just took a fraction of the savings that Senator Coburn came up with this NFS study, and you just multiplied it by the 1,300 federal agencies, you save just a fraction of that. You would save $300 billion.
But look, Susan's exactly right. And let me just say, this stuff, Jim, was going on when the Bushes were in power. The Republicans have been just as bad as this as Democrats in spending money. This is on both of them. And the fact is, the amount of waste, we have Republicans committing suicide with Medicare instead of going in and dealing with the issue in front of them, which is the discovery of billions of dollars. All
right, hang on, we'll pick it up. And, also, we've got a special report tonight on a lizard that may end drilling if this endangered species list with this lizard in West Texas takes place. You're not going to believe this story. Ainsley Earhart went to Texas for us.